a webinar and the other is in person. And Sandy, I'll hand it over to you to share about seed starting because it's going to be spring, right? Or
All right.
is
Thank
it
you,
already?
Sarah.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Like Sarah said, we're going to talk about seed starting tonight. I welcome all of you to the presentation. I will be sharing what I have learned over the past 25 or 30 years planting seeds, and what I have learned as a master gardener for the process. Why would you want to start your own seeds? It's really because it gives you for me, the gardening independence, that I can select my seeds in January, February, have them get them started at the opportune time when I'm not really in the middle of trying to get outside and get my gardens ready and clean up from winter and the things that I didn't do in the fall, and then try to go to all the different gardening stores and nurseries and find what I want. So it really makes my time much better. It also can give you a lot of greater variety. If you see a variety of a flower or a vegetable that you really think would be great, you're not running all over the city or trying to find it during peak planting season. You can have stronger and healthier seedlings because you're in control of their health and their growth. You can have an earlier harvest. Our growing season is short, and an example is I really wanted to try growing loofah because my sister had, and she lives in Kentucky with a much longer growing season. But their growing season really stretches ours. So I started them early and actually put them out at like 3-foot plants, and they still didn't completely dry on the vine, but I did get some loofah this past year. Cost savings, you can save cost. A package of seeds has certainly increased in cost. Good quality seed now are probably anywhere from $5 to $8 a package, but you might get 50 plants out of those. So it can be cost savings. Plus you get the satisfaction and enjoyment from being able to grow your own plants and watch them mature and then enjoy either the flowers or the vegetables from them. So it's really nice. How do you decide what you want to plant? Well, what do you like? What does your family like? Have you seen flowers in magazines, catalogs that you really like? Native plants are really a hot topic right now. Just a word of warning, many native plants are very difficult to start from seed inside. They need cold stratification, then warm, then some of them even need a second cold stratification. I have tried them, and with minimal success. There are a few that I have been very successful with, but a lot of them just didn't work at all. And you want to think about how much space you have. Do you have room for just a couple pots on your patio or your deck? Or do you have a fairly large space? And how will that impact how much time you have to spend for gardening? If you only have 10, 15 minutes a day, you might want to limit it to a very small garden or just a pot or two. But if you have the time to spend a couple hours a day or a full day a week, you might want to put in a larger area in a pot. And what kind of soil do you have? I stress that if you've never planted in that area, you might, to get a soil test, Cooperative Extension has the kits and the instructions, and you send them to Cornell, and within 2 weeks, you have a very detailed description of what you need to do to amend your soil or what your soil is strong in or weak in, so you really know what you're working with. Think about how much sun your garden receives, and remember that this time of year, the sun is going to be different than it will be in June, July, and August. most vegetables need what they call a full sun, which is the 6 to 8 hour range. And if you get that 6 hours in the morning, you may make it, but you may not for some of your really strong sun needing vegetables, because the morning sun just isn't that strong. Whereas if you get 5 hours of strong afternoon sun, you might make your full sun. So think about that, and think about, are you going to have animal competition? One year we had the deer chew every leaf off of every one of our bell peppers. Even though that there was a fence around them, they were managed to find a spot that they could get into it. Rabbits will eat your lettuce. Other types of animals will pull your plants, your flowers, and your plants completely up out of the ground. So think about, can you protect your plants, and do you have the ability to put a fence around it? What we have done is just put 7-foot snow or deer fence around ours with poles. What supplies do you need? The basic things are just seed, containers, and soil, but we will talk about those in detail. Just a little information, a seed is really a complete package. It's complete ovum. It's an ovum that contains the embryonic plant and the stored food that it needs for the first few days of life. But you're going to want to select fresh seed from reliable sources. And what I mean by reliable sources, there are tons of seed companies out there. You can go to some of the discount stores and probably find seed for $1 a package, but the product that you get from them and how reliable the germination rates are very questionable. I tend to order my seeds online because I like the way they come packaged better, and I will talk about that when we get to the seed packaging. But a reliable source, I tend to choose from growers that are located in a growing area that's similar to ours, meaning the Northeast, because I figure that those plants were grown and the seed were harvested and cured in environments similar to the one that they're going to need to grow in. However, our growing season is short. Anything that has a growing maturity or date of maturity greater than 90 to 100 days is very difficult to be able to get it to maturity in our area. So if you're trying to decide between a bell pepper that has a 75 or 90-day, I would pick the 75 if things are all equal, because you're going to have a much better chance of getting that bell pepper to maturity before our frost. An excellent source for helping you decide on which variety of plants to select is at the gardening.cornell.edu. There's also, through the Cornell website, a bed variety section that actually will list which varieties are the best producers or the most reliable for our area. And that reference is at the end of the slide presentation. The Inside Dirt, which is produced by Cornell Cooperative Extension here in Ontario, in this March or the spring, couple of the spring issues will almost always have that list available for you as well. But the site has a profile of over 269 flowers and 58 vegetables, and each profile contains a detailed description and growing instructions, as well as site requirements, soil requirements, the different varieties and special uses for the plant, and as well as solutions for managing pests and diseases for vegetables. So it's just an incredibly valuable site to use if you have questions. The hardiness zone in our area for the most part is a 6A, and how those are that zone is determined is by the the lowest temperatures that we usually get throughout the winter. I have heard reliable gardening experts give talks, and they really feel like the area that they're gardening in is a 5B because it's an exposed area, where they get a lot of wind, not a lot of protection from the elements, and they just don't have a lot of luck with plants that are only hardy to zone 6. Whereas if you've got a very protected area in your yard that you're going to be planting, you can perhaps push it to as high as a 5B site. It's just depends upon your area and where you are. So just think about that. And where that comes into is if you're growing perennials or some vegetables that like artichokes, I'm thinking a lot of the artichokes grow from one year to the next. So you may want to think about your zone if that's the truth, what you're thinking about growing. You need soil. Seeds germinate best in a light, sterile, fine textured mix that has a high moisture holding content. You want to look for a seed starting soil or mix that contains a mix of peat moss, vermiculite, perlite, but really no actual soil. And I advise you to avoid the mixes containing the hydrogels. Those are the things that help to keep your soil moist, water once a week, that type of thing, and the fertilizers. Those two elements in your seed starting mix can change the pH and can supply chemicals that can make it very difficult for your seeds to germinate. So I advise that you avoid soil or seed mixes that contain those two things. Containers, you need something to put your seeds in and your soil in. Any small clean container that has a drainage hole that's about no more than 2 or 3 inches deep. The little K cups make great seed starting things. Yogurt, I've seen people use yogurt cups, the little 6-packs that you bring home from the nursery and don't know what to do with, that most people just throw out or try to recycle. Any of those can be used. If you're using a reusable container, they really should be sterilized with a 10% solution of bleach. It just kills any diseases that might be there and gives you a good start for your new seeds. Peat pods are also an option. I tend to use the peat pods. They're a little bit more expensive. I like them because just for the simple ease of using them. And that's what you see in the picture here. They come in about 4 different sizes, I think. This is the regular size that you can find in most garden stores. This is called a super deep pod, and then they make even a bigger one. I like the super deep. It's about twice the size of the regular one. It gives you more room for your roots to develop, so you're not having to transplant quite as soon. But the bigger one, I did not like. It was just too big, and I didn't find that the seedlings did as well in them. You're also going to need, for most plants, you're going to need some sort of heat source. The heat mat here on the right are readily available. They're about the same size as one of those black trays that you would start your seeds in. And they're meant to for seed starting, provide an even source of heat, and they're readily available. This is a heat coil or heat cable that I got, I'm sure probably at least 25 years ago. I think it was meant to go outside, but I find that it works inside, fastened down to the trays in my plant stand, and then I put the black trays with the peat pods inside into each of these trays, and it works great for me. But I'm sure that once it quits working, I'll end up going totally to the heat mats because I don't think these can be found any longer. Most seeds grown indoors need a light source, and lighting is incredibly confusing. There was an article in the Inside Dirt last month that went over a lot of things, and even after having read it 3 or 4 times, I'm still not totally clear on exactly what the author was recommending. But most seeds can be grown to transplant using a T8 4-bulb shop light or a T5 4-bulb shop light. The lighting does need to be able to be positioned very close to the plants and kept on anywhere. Once again, it varies anywhere from 12 to 22 hours a day. We keep ours on about 16 hours a day, and I keep the light within 2 inches of my plants, so it's very, very close to it. The expensive purple horticultural lights can decrease the amount of time that you need a day. However, according to the article, the cheaper ones are actually worse than just a plain T5 or T8 bulb. So unless you really want to spend the money to get the very expensive purple horticulture ones, you'd probably be better off with just a regular shop light. In general, when you buy your lights, the more intensity is the better. And the PFF is the unit of light intensity. So if you can find the PFF on your light, which they said you should be able to, although I looked at mine and I couldn't find it, you can judge which one would be better. And this is kind of this is our setup. It sits in our storage area in our basement. There is no outside light whatsoever. This is the 4 lights, and they are totally adjustable down right to the metal tray where it sits, where the plants sit, or it can be raised up to about 12 or 18 inches. And it really has worked very well for us over a number of years. Where do you want to start them to grow them? When I first started growing seeds, I started them on an old ping pong table in our basement with a shop light on a chain that I could adjust up and down that was fastened to the rafters with a couple of nails. But shelves, or you can go for the plant stands like we have. I was fortunate to be able to get one many, many years ago, and it has held up remarkably well, as you can see from the way it looks. It's been well used. But anything, you don't need that type of an expensive plant stand. You can go with a table, you can go with shelves, anything where you can fasten a light, an adjustable light above it, and put your seeds and your trays on that. And this is when I was talking about your seed packages. The ones that I get from ordering online tend to have a lot more information on them about the planting conditions, timing, spacing, and everything than the ones I see in the stores with the pretty pictures on them. As you can see, these don't have pretty pictures. They're just all information. But it helps you decide when to plant. Usually late January, early February, I get a calendar down and I decide when in the second half of May I want to target as the planting time. And then I count weeks backwards and mark them on the calendar. I go through my seeds and look to see how far out away from starting the seed do they need to be started for before I can transplant. Put them all in, put the like numbers together in a pile, put a label that they need to be planted on such and such a date, and put them back in the box. And then each week from starting probably next week on, I start beginning to plant my seeds based upon how long they're going to need to germinate, how many weeks before they'll be able to be transplanted. but they will, your package will tell you how deep to plant your seed, what temperature is best for germination. And then they will also tell you what your growing days are before harvest, for the most part. Flowers particularly, some of them need a dark germination time, meaning that they do not want and will not germinate if they're exposed to light. So particularly zinnias, I know because I learned that the hard way. I had a terrible time getting my zinnias to germinate. And then finally I read the seed package more carefully and saw that they didn't need that light that I was carefully giving them. But you can also use guides such as from Home Gardening, cornell.edu, for planting guides. Our last frost averages May 14th. Many people who are longtime residents of this area will not plant before Memorial Day. Others have moved it forward and figured if they need to cover their plants, they will. But the average first frost is October 1st, although it seems to be getting later and later, but this is the most recent information I could find. Other supplies you need are masking tape, a marking pen. I use what I call as my pokey stick. It's just a little tiny dowel that I use to tamp the seeds down into the soil. And for tiny seeds, I personally prefer the needle nose pliers to help me pick the seeds out of my hand and place them in my peat pods or my container. They make dispensing devices that you can buy for tiny seeds that are supposed to work wonderfully. I tried one once and was not successful with it and went back to my needle nose pliers. It just, for me, it works better. To get ready to plant, you need to moisten your seed starting soil. You can do it a couple of ways. You can put your seed starting soil in your containers and place those containers in a warm tray of water until the soil is at the surface is moist, or you can take a 1 or 2 gallon Ziploc bag, put a gallon of seed starting mix in it and add 4 cups of water, mix and let it sit for 4 hours or until the soil is uniformly moist. And then put that moist soil in your container to plant. And then if you're using the peat pods, we place them in a tray upside down and cover them or put a lot of warm water on them and wait till they expand to their full height and then turn them over and they're ready to put the seeds in. I can't stress enough with anyone as to how important it is to label and to be very careful. Invariably, no matter how careful we are, we end up with a hot pepper in among our bells or a cherry tomato in among the bromas. But if you start off with good intentions, you have fewer of those things happen. When we do plant, if we're planting two different seed producers of the same type of plant, I do like to label which one the seeds are from, so that if I have better success with one than the other, I know that next year that would be the one I'd want to use. But as you plant, write out your labels. And then we also keep a journal of when we planted, what we planted, when they germinated, when we transplanted them, and then when we set them out and how well they did. It just helps make those decisions the next year easier as far as what seed you might want to use, so that it streamlines the process and you're not going, now what was that grew really well last year? To plant your seeds, you're going to poke a small hole in the soil, put 1 or 2 seeds in the soil at the appropriate depth that the seed package says, and then carefully cover the hole and very gently tamp the soil down. You don't want to pack the soil down. You want to make it easy for those little seedlings to poke their little green leaves through that soil. if you're using a peat pond, we put a couple seeds in the center. I use my pokey stick and push them down to the appropriate length, and then generally take my fingers and just squeeze the pot a little bit to make sure that they're well covered into the container. After you've planted, you're going to want to mist your soil lightly just to settle it. And then you're going to cover it with a light plastic covering to keep your seeds moist, and mostly to keep them moist. They dry, once they dry, you do not want your seeds to dry out. You're going to keep, and if you do need to water them before they germinate, you're going to water from the bottom using a room temperature or slightly warm soil. And then you're going to put them in a warm place. Like I said, you know, they like heat, warmth. You look at your seed package and they say anywhere, you may see anywhere from 70 to 80 or 85 degrees for germination temperatures. I know a lot of people who don't use heat mats and don't use any under the tray source of heat, but they place them near their wood stove or in the room where their wood stove is, so that the room is a warm room. Our house is nowhere close to 70 degrees most of the time. So we do use and need the heat mat or the heat cables. Things that will prevent your seeds from germinating well is the condition of your seed. If it's old, if it wasn't stored properly, the best way to store seed from one year to the next is in a dry, cool, dark spot. Or if you're trying to save your seed from your plants from last year, was it cured properly, that type of thing. The presence of water, if you let your seeds dry out, that little seed that's trying to penetrate that hard shell that's around will just not make it. And it's virtually impossible to save your seed and get a germination out of it if you've let your seeds dry out. Even though you're covering it in plastic, you don't want to tuck that plastic in or make it airtight, because you really want some air so that you're not in a real suffering environment. The temperature, like I said, needs to be favorable for germination. Most packets will tell you the temperature that needs to be germinated at. If not, the website would. And light, check to see if your plant needs light or your seedling needs light for germination or not. When your seeds start to sprout and you start to see those first little green leaves poking through the soil, you want to remove your cover, and your seedlings will need 12 to 16 hours of light. Ideally, that's what we use. Like I said, the article that I read had seedlings needing anywhere from 28, 26 to 10 hours of light. We have always used the 12 to 16 hours of light, and I place it just about 2 inches above the top of the plant or the container. Windows are really not very good for trying to germinate your plant in, because the temperature is not consistent. The light isn't consistent. You're going to get very spindly, weak plants and probably not be happy with the results. And you're going to want to water with room temperature or slightly warm water from the bottom, and keep it and keep your soil slightly moist, not wet. I think more seedlings die because they're probably kept too wet than too dry. You certainly don't want your soil to completely dry out, but you don't want it sopping wet either. And once your seedlings have set out their second set of leaves, this is a seed leaf right here, and this is your second light, your second set of this is your true leaf. You're going to want to begin to circulate some air around or in the plant. setting a small circulating fan in the room on low, just to circulate that air, prevents many of the diseases that people get, like damping off or mold, and helps to make that stem a lot stronger and support that plant better. If more than one of your seeds sprouted in your container, you do need to pinch or cut off the weaker plants, so you only have one plant per your container. I actually usually wait until I'm getting the second true leaf before I do that, so that I have a better idea of which ones are going to be stronger and which ones not. And using the peat pods, I can sometimes actually separate a couple of plants that are in one peat pod when I go to transplant. I sometimes lose them both, sometimes I'll lose one, but sometimes I can actually get both of them out of that. When is it time to transplant and why? You want to stimulate the roots. The roots are going to need a bigger area to develop so that they can feed that plant, and you're going to need some richer soil. Remember, you planted it in a pretty sterile soil environment for those seeds to sprout. And when do you want to do it? After the first true leaf develops. As you can see, this is still just got the 2 seed leaves, whereas here are your seed leaves. Here's your first set, and this is your second set that have developed. So that once your first true set develops, it's good. You can transplant. Usually your plant's going to be probably about 2 to 2.5 inches by that time. And it's easier because your stem's not as long and you're less likely to touch it and damage it. The stem is still an incredibly delicate part of the plant at this point in time. How are you going to transplant? If you're using reusable containers, you're going to want to sterilize them like before. You can put moss in the bottom, which will help hold the soil in the container if they have large holes in the bottom. You want to prepare a soil mix using your seed starting mix and then 50% of a lightweight potting soil. It can be like a container soil or just a regular says potting soil. You want to once again avoid ones with fertilizer or the hydrogels, just for the same reasons that you did before. And you want to moisten your soil like you had before in the bags with the water. It's really better for transplanting that you do it this way, because then you don't have to fill your containers before you put your seedling in it. What I do is I put a little bit of the soil in the bottom of it. I remove my seedling. If it's in a container, using a craft stick, popsicle stick, table knife, something that you can gently get down the edge and lift that plant up without damaging the stem. And you want to lift it out, put it into your transplant container without causing any damage to the roots or the stem, if at all possible, and never hold it by the stem, because you will crush it and the plant will die. You can hold it by the leaves or by the root ball. I suggest the root ball if at all possible. And then you're going to add more pre-moistened soil around it and gently tap it in, but you want to keep that soil loose so that it can get some air. You don't want a real tight pack on your. And then you're going to how to care for your transplants. Once again, you do not want to overwater. Water only when the soil begins to feel dry. Water from the bottom using warm water, and continue with your fan for air circulation. You don't want this humidity to drop below very low or incredibly high. Um, they really do best between about a 50 or 60%, which is just about what a lot of homes are. It may be just a little bit more humid, but if you've got your plants in a room and they're growing and you're watering them, the humidity around them is probably going to be more moist than your actual air in the rest of your house anyway. Fertilizing, if you're start your seeds when the first true leaves appear. You can use a dilute for liquid fertilizer, half strength fertilizer to water from the bottom. And then once you've transplanted them into your potting mix, you use that dilute 50% solution once every 10 days to 2 weeks. Lighting, like I said, the article was very confusing. It went to 26 hours of light. There's not 26 hours of light in a day. We do about 12 to 16, and our plants do very well with that amount of light. But I do keep them I do keep the lights very, very close, and they do need a period of darkness. And I put it all on a timer because I could not possibly remember to turn my lights on and off and my heat cables on and off and all this. So everything goes on a timer. The ideal temperature ranges once your transplants are your seedlings have been transplanted are about 70 to 75 during the day, and they should cool down a little bit at night. So this is when I take the heat cables and plug them into that timer. And for my flowers, they come off of the heat cables completely. My vegetables, which are generally tomatoes, sweet peppers, and eggplant, we tend to leave on the heat table until they probably get 2 or 3 sets of leaves, true leaves, because they are just such heat-loving plants. And our house tends to be about 66, 67 during the day and 62, 64 at night. So it gets a little bit cooler. Seedlings do need to be hardened off before they can be planted outside. And usually by the time they're ready to be planted outside, they have 3 or 4 sets of true leaves, and they're 4 or 5 inches tall at least, maybe even a little bit bigger. And hardening off means just getting them ready to be planted outside. We bring our trays up, usually sit them in the garage when the weather is into the 70s during the day, for a day or 2, and then we'll put them out in a wind protected shady spot for maybe 3 days, and then gradually begin to expose them first to a little bit of morning sun, and then gradually increase it. And usually we'll take a good 7 and maybe even 2 weeks, 14 days before we transplant our seeds back out, but at least 5 to 7 days to get them used to being outside. And when you plant them, if you're planting them outside on a really bright, sunny, really warm day, give them some shade protection. Put a light fiberglass sheet above them, or erect some type of sunscreen for them so they're not being exposed at the brightest time of the day. It's also usually best if you could transplant them later in the day so that they get a little bit more used to being out in that new environment before the sun hits them the next day. Can you save seeds? Most commercially packaged seeds are good for more than 1 year. Cornell's Department of Vegetable Crops actually has some guidelines on how long you can save your seed. The Inside Dirt will usually in the fall do a reference on how long seed can be saved, or sometime during the growing season it will be in there. If you want to save your own seed, and I know a lot of people who are very successful with this, but some of the disadvantages are when your plants are growing, the pollinators are going to be going from one plant to the next. So there's going to be some cross among your varieties within your crop. So your seed are not going to be absolute true. Dangerous seedborne diseases can affect your next crop. Difficulties in curing your seed. Seed companies cure their seeds in very environmentally controlled conditions. We have a lot of humid conditions, and it's more difficult to make sure they're cured properly. And if you're growing hybrids, it's rare that you would get the same type of result the next year, because a hybrid is not going to necessarily be able to produce that same plant again from that seed that they produce. Some of the problems people have: failure to sprout. Their seeds don't sprout. Your temperature may be too low or too high. The soil may have dried out. We talked about that. You may have planted your seeds too deeply, or they may have needed to be covered and you didn't cover them. If you watered from the top, did the seeds float off of the soil and into your trays? If your seeds were old or poorly stored, they didn't have good contact with the soil, or there were toxic substances in the soil, or the pH was off. And the damping off disease is probably from my experience, the number one problem people have when they start seeds, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Or the lack of light that need light, or the lack of darkness for seeds that need dark. And the dark is mostly flowers, from what I have found. Dampening off, when this happens, usually the first sign you know that it's happening is your plant just collapses. Your stem becomes mush. And what it is it's a collection of microorganisms that cause the stems to just wither away. The prevention, ways to prevent it, that good air circulation. When we started using a fan, our damping off just about, or really totally stopped. And we did have a problem occasionally before we started using the fan. Overwatering or overcrowding. Once again, the overwatering is just microorganisms have a great environment to grow in. It weakens your plant. Overcrowding, you don't have that air circulation that is so important. Another very common problem is leggy plants, very tall, spindly, weak stems. The insufficient light, usually it's because the light is too high above the plant. If you can keep it within a couple inches of the plant, it really does help. And the fan helps to also strengthen that stem. If you've got excessive high temperatures, it causes your plant to grow quickly, and it might, you might have leggy plants. And crowding, if they're crowded, they will be stretching, trying to find that light, which will cause them to be leggy. Mold is usually a problem of poor drainage or insufficient soil aeration, possibly over fertilization or lack of air circulation. If you correct whichever one of those things you think is your problem, your mold problem will probably disappear. And unless it's a really bad problem before you've discovered it, your plants will probably be able to survive and be okay. Leaf discoloration, which really I have not found to be a big problem. A paleness occasionally, and usually it's because it's a nitrogen deficiency. An extra dose of fertilizer will correct that for the most part. It could be because of the insufficient light, but we find it mostly because of nitrogen deficiency. The reddish purple undersides, which I have, or the bronze and brown leaf edges, I have not really experienced, but it could be because of a phosphorus deficiency, or the pH is too acidic, preventing the phosphorus absorption. And if you are really having a problem with your reddish purple undersides, you could take just a little bit of your soil from around your seedling and do a pH test. Cooperative Extension will do one, or any of the master gardeners can do one for you. If you're not able to do one. Bronze or brown edges could be overwatered or a potassium deficiency. Like I said, I have not really experienced or seen those problems, but certainly giving them a little extra dose of those nutrients, if that's a problem, if that's what the problem is, would correct that. Some of the references that are invaluable, in my opinion, is the Inside Dirt. It's a newsletter that's produced by the Ontario County Cornell Cooperative Extension. The annual printed subscription is $18 a year, and the email version's 10. It's 10 copies. It provides current, pertinent planting, gardening information for our area. It is just, we use it and have saved every copy of it that we have gotten since I started getting it as a master gardener in 2015. And continually go back and look at an article that came out, was in there a couple years ago, and that type of thing. Cornell website has tons of gardening information. Gardening.com, gardeningcornell.edu is a great one. The veg variety list, which varieties of vegetables are the best or the most dependable for our area. I found that Renee's gardening.com had a lot of interesting, useful information as well. When I first started doing some seed starting and presenting seed starting, and probably my very first start was a handbook on seed starting. It just really clarified some of my questions and some of my mistakes that I was making, and really helped that. So I want to thank you. We can open this up to questions. I know it sounds confusing, but it